Imagine a country born into war, a place where peace was just a pause between conflicts. This is the story of Sudan and its 50-year struggle that the world too often ignored. For half a century, from 1955 to 2005, two devastating civil wars raged, leaving millions dead and a nation permanently fractured. This wasn't just a local conflict. It was a crisis shaped by colonial greed, religious dogma, and the curse of black gold. Today we uncover the hidden history of the Sudanese civil wars. To understand the wars, we have to go back to before Sudan was even a single country. From 1899, it was ruled by Britain and Egypt in a strange setup called a condominium. But in reality, the British ran the show, and they drew a line right through the middle of the territory. The north, predominantly Arab and Muslim, was developed and integrated into a centralized administration. The south, home to diverse African ethnic groups who were largely Christian or followed traditional beliefs, was intentionally isolated. The British policy was clear: divide and rule. They restricted education, blocked trade between north and south, and left the southern regions underdeveloped. A deep sense of injustice and exclusion began to fester. As Sudan hurtled towards independence in 1956, there was no unified national identity. The political stage was dominated by northern elites, who saw the South not as an equal partner, but as a territory to be controlled. The seeds of conflict were sown long before the first shot was fired. The war began even before the nation itself. In 1955, just months before independence, Southern soldiers in the Torah Mutiny rebelled. They refused orders to transfer north, fearing domination by the Arab-led government in Khartoum. This single act of defiance ignited the First Sudanese Civil War. When Sudan officially became independent in 1956, the northern government in Khartoum quickly broke its promises of creating a federal system that would grant the South autonomy. Instead, they did the opposite. They began to impose Arabic as the official language and push Islamic culture southward, confirming the South's worst fears. By 1963, the Southern resistance was no longer a scattered rebellion. Guerrilla fighters united under the banner of the Enya, a name meaning snake venom. Led by Joseph Lagou, their goal was simple and desperate: autonomy, or if necessary, complete secession from the north. Operating from the dense bush and borderlands, they waged a grueling war against the central government, receiving quiet support from neighboring countries like Uganda and even Israel, who saw an opportunity to challenge Arab influence in the region. The conflict dragged on, a brutal, low-intensity war, largely hidden from the world's view. Then, in 1969, a military coup in Khartoum brought Colonel Jafar Numeri to power. Initially, Numeri signaled a change in direction, seeking a peaceful resolution. After 17 years of bloodshed, a flicker of hope emerged. In 1972, with the help of international mediators like the World Council of Churches and Ethiopia's emperor, Haile Selassie, the Addis Ababa Agreement was signed. This landmark deal granted the South its own autonomous regional government, and the guns finally fell silent. But the cost was staggering. Over 500,000 people had been killed, and millions more were displaced. For a decade, an uneasy peace held. But underneath the surface, the core issues were never resolved. The peace was fragile, and it was about to be shattered. In 1983, the man who had signed the peace treaty, Jafar Numeri, single-handedly destroyed it. In a stunning reversal, he abolished the South's autonomy, divided the region to weaken its unity, and, most critically, imposed strict Islamic Sharia law across the entire country, including the non-Muslim South. For Southerners, this was the ultimate betrayal. The Second Sudanese Civil War erupted, and it would be far longer, deadlier, and more complex than the first. This time, the fight wasn't just about autonomy. It was about the very soul of the nation. A new, more powerful rebel movement emerged, the Sudan People's Liberation Army, or SPLA, led by the charismatic and intellectual U.S.-educated economist, Colonel John Garang. Unlike the Anyanya before them, Garang's vision wasn't secession. He fought for a new Sudan, a united, secular, and democratic nation where all citizens, regardless of religion or ethnicity, were equal. Just as the war reignited, a new factor poured fuel on the fire: oil. Massive reserves were discovered in the South, precisely in the areas where the conflict was raging. Suddenly, Sudan's civil war became a global resource war. The government in Khartoum, backed by international oil companies, saw the oil as its economic lifeline. Control of the oil fields became a primary military objective. A brutal strategy of clearing the land was employed, with government-backed militias driving civilians away from oil-rich zones through terror and violence. The war was no longer just about identity and religion. It was now financed by and fought over black gold. The political landscape in Khartoum remained volatile. Nimeri was overthrown in 1985, but the civilian governments that followed were weak and unable to secure peace. Then, in 1989, another coup brought a hardline Islamist regime to power, led by Omar al-Bashir. Backed by the influential cleric Hassan al-Turabi, Bashir's government militarized the conflict on an unprecedented scale. They framed the war as a jihad or holy war against the southern infidels, mobilizing militias and unleashing a campaign of scorched earth tactics. The 1990s were the darkest decade. The conflict descended into a humanitarian catastrophe. The U.S. designated Sudan a state sponsor of terrorism, while regional powers backed opposing sides, turning the country into a proxy battlefield. A devastating famine in 1998, partly induced by the war, killed tens of thousands, capturing the world's attention with heartbreaking images of starvation. In response, the United Nations launched Operation Lifeline Sudan, one of the largest humanitarian aid efforts in history, trying to save lives in a war zone where food itself had become a weapon. After more than 2 decades of unimaginable suffering, the international community, led by the United States, finally applied enough pressure to bring both sides to the negotiating table. The talks held in Kenya were long and difficult, but in 2002, a breakthrough occurred with the Machakos Protocol, which for the first time officially recognized the South's right to self-determination. This paved the way for the Comprehensive Peace Agreement, or CPA, signed in 2005. The handshake between John Garang of the SPLA and the Vice President of Sudan symbolized the end of Africa's longest-running civil war. The CPA granted the South 6 years of autonomy, to be followed by a referendum on independence. The final toll of the Second War was horrific. An estimated 2 million people, dead mostly from war-induced famine and disease, and over 4 million displaced from their homes, creating one of the largest refugee crises of the 20th century. In 2011, as promised by the peace agreement, the people of southern Sudan voted. The result was overwhelming. Nearly 99% chose to break away. On July 9, 2011, the Republic of South Sudan was born, becoming the world's newest nation amidst euphoric celebrations. But independence was not a magic cure. The legacy of 50 years of war runs deep. Unresolved border disputes, particularly over the oil-rich Abyei region, ethnic rivalries that were exploited during the war, and political infighting soon plunged the new nation of South Sudan into its own tragic civil war, proving that the scars of the past are not easily healed. The story of Sudan's civil wars is a powerful lesson. It shows how colonial lines drawn on a map can create fractures that last for generations. It reveals how the discovery of resources can curse a nation rather than bless it. And most importantly, it is a testament to the resilience of millions of people whose lives were upended by forces far beyond their control, in a struggle that the world is only now beginning to fully understand. Thank you so much for watching. The history of Sudan is complex and ongoing, and this is just one part of its story. If you found this video informative, please hit the like button, subscribe to our channel, and ring the bell so you don't miss our next exploration into the stories that shaped our world. See you next time.